Hey everybody, this is Madhav here from the Remote Marketing Podcast. I've got Kevan Lee on the show today. A lot of might know him from Buffer, and he's currently leading the marketing team at Oyster HR. What I absolutely love about him is not just his illustrious career as a marketing lead, but the fact that he's constantly shared his learnings along the journey, kind of giving back. And a small part of that is his Substack newsletter. And man, I just gotta say, you're on a roll. Like I was saying earlier, every issue is so informative and in depth. And I joined it something like issue number 200. So I don't know. I mean, if has that been running for 4 years? Like, how do you even get the ideas? To share something every week. And all of that is just there's a lot of introspection in that. And for so many years, what motivates you to kind of share your knowledge on your Substack newsletter?
Yeah, it's a great question. I should probably own up to a little trick that I've used to number them. So I've been on Substack for 2 years. And so the first digit of that number represents the year that I'm publishing in. So last year, everything started with one, so it was all 100s. So it only goes to 52 because I do one a week. So this year we'll go to 252, then it'll roll over into 301. So it's a slight hack there, but I will say I have been posting to the newsletter before Substack. And so in aggregate, yes, there might be 4, 5, 6 years worth of emails, but the number system is a little, a little suspect, perhaps. Yeah, so like I came into my tech career through content marketing, and content was huge for Buffer as a growth engine. I was fortunate to be able to build that out to a pretty great degree. And in doing so, I had to create a cadence of writing for myself. So I was posting, 4 2,000-word articles every week on different keyword topics and things like that. And I built that muscle up there. Prior to that, I have a journalism degree, and so writing has always been part of what I aspire to do and enjoy doing, and it's how I communicate and process things for myself. So I'm fortunate in that regard that writing is something I enjoy and comes somewhat naturally to me as an output, and so that helps. And then I think, like for me, coming into marketing from journalism, I don't have a business degree. I don't have an MBA. I'm not formally educated in anything that I do today, which is scary to say out loud, but very true. And so, I learned from others, and I would love to give everyone else the opportunity to learn anything that I have that might be helpful. I think the longer you follow me, you'll probably find many weeks it might not be helpful for you, but maybe it's helpful for someone else, or maybe I don't want to judge if what I'm sharing can be of use, because I think there's people on my list and people in my network that at different stages in their careers, and anything that I have to share, if it gets them one step closer to what they ultimately want to do, I'm privileged to be able to share that perspective with them. So I think that's motivating in a sense. And then I think doing it every week has been a good forcing function for me. I'm sure we'll get into some of the benefits of that later, but it's been a good forcing function, like habit for me to create and kind of force myself to think deeply and reflect each week on what I might have to share. I think that's a useful exercise rather than just being in the work so much that you don't take time to pull your head out and look around.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense. Even kind of like the podcast, it's almost like there's almost like I think there was a tweet that I read from Ethan Chow, which said momentum. Like if you've got momentum, like just like put all of your efforts in there. And so if you've got something that's going on week by week, just keep committing to it. And yeah, that kind of helps you kind of commit to those timelines. So I think that makes sense. But it's very interesting that before marketing, you actually were in journalism. Like I think a lot of people, at least even when I kind of heard about you, it was mostly through Buffer's work, and there was probably a big marketing team and stuff like that. So I guess when you kind of, I think it was probably a big transition for you, right? From journalism to marketing, and then it originally started out as kind of like like you said, it was articles, it was content marketing manager, and then eventually became the head of marketing, right? What does it take to kind of move, from journalism to kind of head of marketing? Because you're not, like you said, you didn't have like a degree in kind of business or something like that. Like the art of kind of manage of being like a head of marketing is something that you yeah, it's obviously something you learn with practice, but you also kind of um you have to figure it out, right? So like like how did, like, what did you do to kind of go from that transition of being kind of like being in journalism as kind of like a writer to kind of head of marketing at like 3 or 4 major software companies?
Yeah. Oh, you're speaking to all my imposter syndrome that I have. Like, I think that might be part of it. Um, is I don't have I have playbooks, I have perspectives, I've gained these things over the years, but I also have a unique perspective that I bring into the marketing teams that I join. So I'm not perfect for every team, but I've been lucky to find teams that do need the unique skills that I have to offer. I think for me, a lot of it has been kind of, it goes back to a few things that I look for when I hire folks. And so I look for drive, I look for curiosity, and I look for empathy. And so those are 3 things I hope have been true of my career trajectory too, and like how I've arrived where I've arrived. And so, step 1 was transitioning from journalism into marketing. So that was, having no network in the tech space. I live in a small town in a small state in the US. And so I'm not close to the tech scene.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to be first of all curious about what that world was like, so that I could learn as fast as I could, as much as I could. I had to be driven to make it work and succeed, and like set a desired state for myself that I would pursue and give all my effort. So that was what it took to get into that world. I started working at Vox after something. I built a blog and community site that got acquired into their network of blogs, and so that gave me a taste of it. And then at Buffer, kind of building that, I guess more of like a B2B SaaS network of connections and references and things like that. So that helped me get in the door there. And then, once I was in there, I joined as employee number 17. And so, early enough that there was a lot of impact to be had. And so I kind of ran with that as best I could. And having spent, years there and being fortunate to experience success along with the company, I think that experience has been useful as I've taken it to other spots. I think what I've found in those journeys is that, like, no one ever asked me about my education or my my school or my degrees or anything like that. It's always about the work that I've done and my experience at Buffer and other spots. It's about how I'm able to articulate ideas or thoughts on my Substack or in different spots like that personal branding aspect of it. And so I think it hasn't, I know some folks have like this discrete path for themselves, like I'm going to be this role today and this next role tomorrow and XYZ here, and they know the steps to get there. For me, it was more like I'm going to walk through whatever doors happen to open in front of me that align with who I want to be and the impact I want to have in the world. Unfortunately, that's a very, I say that from a place of privilege, which I realize like not everyone has doors that open in the way that mine opened for me. But I think there was an aspect of not really planning on being where I'm at in this point in my career, but planning on making the most of the opportunities that I had in front of me. So like when I was at Buffer, I remember this exact specific moment. I remember the exact place I was sitting in the room of the house where one of the co-founders was having a conversation with me about, do I want to go deeper on the content side, like run all of content. I was kind of running all of content, but like build out a team and be in that role. or do I want to go into more like a product marketing role that's going to expand into, leading all of the marketing team? We had one of our co-founders was kind of leading marketing to a degree at the time. And so, I stepped through the door that led to be like the head of marketing. If I had taken the other door, it probably would have been like more of the content career for me. And so I think about those moments a lot. And I think for me, it took a bit of courage, probably a lot of naivety about not knowing what I was signing up for in a way. But obviously, I'm very glad I did, and glad it has worked out the way it's worked out.
No, and I think that's so true. Like the way you said it, you've got these doors, right? If you took on the product marketing role, you went to kind of like a more head of marketing position. It was content. Either way, it could have been, a different path altogether. But so like as you're kind of going through this journey, there's obviously one of the things you might have experienced is that at certain, let's say, important revenue milestones, that obviously the marketing strategy is always pivoting. There's probably a different channel, or probably scaling of a certain channel, or maturing of a channel, or maturing of the team, or whatever, right? And all of those are like you said, these are new experiences that are coming, which have not been dealt before. So did you ever kind of have like a coach or a mentor that you could kind of bounce off ideas to, or again, you were just kind of tackling it as things are being kind of not thrown at you, but kind of like as they kind of came in your path?
Yeah, I haven't had a formal mentor or coach. The Buffer's co-founder who hired me, he had a great marketing mind, and so I learned a lot from him about how to conduct myself, how to think about things. But he left somewhat early into my Buffer journey. Probably the thing that has given me the most confidence is taking courses from places like Reforge, that I can connect with peers and kind of be taught by industry leaders. It's not in a one-to-one or mentoring coaching context, but it's in that context of, I think what's helpful for me is that I can validate how much I know or don't know in those courses. Usually it's how much I don't know. But like, I think it's useful to know, like, this is how the rest of the industry is thinking about it, seeing it. And I can understand how Buffer fits in here, or how Poly fits in here, how Oyster fits in here, and recognize that, yes, some of the stuff that we do is going to be unique. Like at Buffer, we didn't have a paid ads budget, and so much of our industry relies on performance marketing and all that. So that was unique. But like the macro concepts, I can figure out how I fit there and bring those into my work. So that was probably more useful than the one-to-one relationships, was just that like growth mindset for learning and consuming information.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I've also kind of done that Reforge growth series, like great learnings and everything. Like if anyone's listening, highly recommend. It's an amazing way to kind of get some learnings in a very intense 6-7 week program. So
Yes.
But
yes,
yeah, so amazing. All right. So then and then you said, like when you kind of started writing all of these learnings, as a way to kind of connect the dots, as well as kind of like it's something that you enjoyed, part of your journalism, right? So of course, when you kind of started out at Buffer or before that, right? Like what you said, personal brand was probably something that might have also kind of triggered you to kind of keep blogging. Do you think blogging about your experiences kind of definitely had an impact with how your career went and the opportunities that came your way?
Yeah, that's a good question. So one of the reasons why personal brand became important to me is that for a long time, I thought I could lose my job at Buffer any day. Like both from like startups are risky, but more so from the perspective of, I'm new to this. When are they going to realize I'm not like everyone else that I'm reading about and learning about? It's like there was a bit of it where it's like, if I can build a personal brand, I de-risk myself a little bit from
That's so true.
any of that, which was completely a fabrication. Like Buffer has and remains like a wonderful place, and they would tell me if they if they didn't like me before they got to that point. But there was an aspect of that was like I can control my career to a degree if I own who I am out there. And I'll say like my career experiences have been my eyes have been open to the world of recruiting, and I think that in that case for recruiters there's probably a larger emphasis on where you work, the title that you have, and then like how well you can tell your own story in a phone screen. I don't know that there's a lot of recruiters doing the research on the personal brand side of things. So it hasn't necessarily come up in those opportunities. The work at Poly I did right after Buffer, the work at Oyster I've done, both those opportunities came to me through recruiters who did cold outreach to me, and so I didn't have a relationship there. But I will say, like, up until the point of joining those new companies, I talked to a lot of other companies that knew me from my personal brand, or learned about me from here and there. I'm lucky to get to advise the Feedly team on how they're growing, and my relationship with their CEO came out of him knowing me from Buffer and knowing me through that experience. And so I think those relationships, even though they didn't lead to jobs, they helped me feel much more confident as I went out and spoke to people when it did feel like I wanted something different in my career. And so without that, I would have been much more nervous and a lot more self-doubt in those calls. I think the other thing that's been helpful is that when I land on a team, I do get kind of an instant, I guess there's some social proof that comes with me when I land somewhere where they can see, oh, maybe they know about me from somewhere. That happened at Oyster. I already knew someone who was there and was already here, and so that was nice. Others can kind of get to know me either faster or feel confident knowing that I'm out there in the world, and they can trust and respect that I might know what I'm talking about. So that's helped a lot, just having that piece of it, which I didn't expect or anticipate, but I found to be true now that I'm inside these places.
Got it. And yeah, I think it definitely does kind of open, like obviously, I think this is something that I read somewhere, but I personally agree with this a lot. I think writing is kind of like the most scalable professional networking activity you can have. It's just it's one-to-many communication, right? You're reaching out to so many people with just one piece of writing, versus everyone kind of messaging you on LinkedIn on a daily basis. Hey, how do you do this? Hey, how do you do that? And you replying to them, on a one-on-one basis. This is definitely much more scalable. So I think that
I
makes
think you're
sense.
exactly right. Like I'm able to, when people ask me things, I can give them a link to something I've written or point them in that direction. And then, yeah, as you build a list, as you build that personal brand, you're able to communicate at scale to a bunch of different folks at the same time, and stay connected in that way without needing to have one-to-one conversations or things like that. So yeah, it's been really efficient.
But all right, so I think kind of when obviously now that you have kind of like a big catalog of content, right? Of course, like there comes a point where yes, there is value in kind of giving back to the community, but sometimes like it requires a lot of time commitment when you're creating your content, and there's running costs and stuff like that, right? And there must have probably been a time, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you thought that maybe there's a lot of content that I'm sharing, perhaps there's a way I can monetize it. Was that ever a time, and like if yes, like what options did you evaluate back then?
Yeah, monetization is such an interesting one. I think when I was deepest down that rabbit trail, it was probably when I was thinking of my next step in my career. I told you earlier I don't really think about next steps in my career. So the thought didn't last very long. But I think I saw potential in that maybe being an open door for me of, can I grow this to a place where this becomes enough for me to have this be a full-time thing. And at that time, I think I was on MailChimp. And so, I was looking at platforms like maybe Patreon, thinking of building some courses that I'd seen other folks doing. And so, doing more of that, like an e-learning type setup. And I think for me, I realized if I want to do that well enough, I really need to, it almost has to be a full-time thing before it becomes a full-time thing. Or I need to dedicate the time to make it so I feel good enough about charging the money that it would take to live off of. So I struggled to like find a lean enough way into that, or a way to validate that, or I may have struggled at the thought of the risk that I would take on and leaving a job to go do my own thing in a thing I hadn't built yet. And so I got a bit stuck there, and fortunately some other doors opened, which I stepped through. But I think my perspective shifted to more of an idea of giving as much away as I can in that spirit of generosity, and the payment piece came in more for those who might want additional support or to help me support the things that I believe in. So for instance, all the proceeds from my Substack, I commit them to I Fund Women, which supports female-led startups and businesses. And so, I think there may be a day where, I move on from Oyster or another job and want the Substack to be more of my thing. But I think for now, it just feels unnecessary for me to keep that for myself. And so I think like I enjoy understanding the mechanics of the monetization, but I don't see monetization on my Substack as like a personal income component yet, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. And I think that's that's incredibly generous and amazing that you're kind of like using your knowledge in marketing and your skills with kind of sharing stuff and using that kind of help a great cause. Like that's just amazing. So I think, of course, it's beautiful that you're doing. So I guess when of course you said, you were kind of evaluating MailChimp, and you worked on MailChimp, and then kind of, you went to Substack. And the thing is that, when I've kind of looked at the last 2 years, and there's a lot of people, started something on Patreon, something on kind of, in earlier before Patreon and stuff. People used to have like paid newsletter lists and all of these video courses on Teachable and stuff like that, right? So what kind of led you to Substack? Maybe it was a simple reason where I was like, and like what makes Substack different from MailChimp according to you?
Yeah, we could talk for hours about my thoughts on MailChimp versus Substack. I think it's so fascinating. I forgot to mention in moving from MailChimp to Substack, I used Review for a little while. Review, which I think just got acquired by Twitter. And so I think for me, MailChimp was, well, first off, it's an amazing platform. Like I love using it. It's such a delight to use. We used it at Buffer for a very long time for our marketing emails. I had used it at past jobs for different things too. And so it was very much like the de facto email provider for me for a very long time. I think MailChimp as a company has pivoted to be more of a small business platform. And that is great in a lot of ways for small businesses. And I think even if I were to consider monetizing whatever thing I have in a more official way, like all those extra social small business tools could even be useful in that context. I think as a personal brand and individual person, the product wasn't evolving to help me in the ways that I was needing. So what that looks like specifically, I wanted the emails to look good, so I would go in and like hand code an HTML email template and populate it manually with information every week and design it and lay it out the way I wanted to. That got a bit tedious, so that's when I explored review, which you can there's a little bookmarklet that you can send links to, and it auto populates into review and a nice little newsletter format. You can also do subscriptions, like paid subscriptions through review, and so that was compelling. MailChimp didn't have that option, or I would have to set up like a manual Stripe integration into all that and figure that out. I think the other thing with MailChimp is that it stops being free after you reach a certain amount of subscribers, and so I saw a ceiling there. I could pay for it, but I was kind of against paying for stuff for my own personal brand, which is another conversation we could probably have, is how do you decide to pay for personal brand stuff? Mm-hmm. And so for me, that was, I kind of saw the writing on the wall a little bit with MailChimp. Like I loved it, but felt a desire to maybe try something new. And I think, so I was somewhat early to Substack. And the two things I loved about it, or I guess the broader theme about it, is I loved the mission of the company, which is to kind of to rethink this creator economy and to provide access and opportunity for the people behind the ideas to own those ideas and to own those audiences and to be rewarded for that type of effort. I think a lot of journalists use Substack, and so coming from that journalism mindset, like how cool is that journalism is a hard job for a lot of folks that doesn't pay super well, and there's a lot of, given the change in the newspaper industry, a lot of ups and downs in those careers. And so the fact that there's software that exists for that persona that could help stabilize their job prospects and compensate them in a way that makes sense, I think was really cool. So that's like the macro idea. I think the other idea is that from more of a like platform perspective, Substack is almost like a blog in a way. And so I don't necessarily think of MailChimp versus Substack as competitors. I think of more like Ghost versus Substack being the more synonymous tools in that case. And like Ghost is a CMS, it's a blog platform, but it has this membership component to it. And then Substack is an email provider, but it has this membership component to it. So I think the membership idea is what marries those two concepts. But with Substack, it's basically like having a blog that's set up for yourself the way they're creating it. And then even one layer lower, what I really liked was that you could click a heart to like individual posts, and you could have comments that were attached to individual posts, which you can't get. I couldn't get that in MailChimp. I don't think I could get that in Review. Not entirely sure, but those are enough compelling reasons for me to give it a try at first. And yeah, I've been there ever since.
Got it. But I think it also kind of warrants a kind of like a follow-up question here, right? Like, so from everything that you've described about Substack, Medium was kind of similar in a way that, well, you create your content, you put it there, and then you can potentially put it under some kind of gated content, which people can pay for and all of that, right? But I guess one of the biggest cons about Medium was this, that, well, I mean, it's changed, but at least at that time, it was like you couldn't kind of host it on your own domain, right? And that's the thing with Substack as well. The content is probably, I'm not like, correct me if I'm wrong, but if it's hosted on Substack, right, you're kind of losing your brand, and like it's not on kevanlee.com, or it's not on and you're potentially not be able to benefit from SEO. Is that ever a concern that for you with Substack?
Yeah, I think the SEO piece is for sure. They did roll out custom domains recently, but you have to pay $50 to get it set up or something like that. So it is possible to have that branding be in line. But yeah, the SEO component is an interesting one. I think my way around that is, or the way that I think about it is that a lot of the issues that I send aren't really SEO ready, or they're not ever going to be SEO ready. They're just like random thoughts or rundowns of different things. And so if there is SEO content, I'm not good at this, but I then transfer that over to my blog, and then the blog almost becomes like a best of kind of place, whereas Substack becomes kind of the river of all sorts of stuff that may or not be evergreen and needing to be discovered. So, but you're right. Like if you, depending on how you treat your Substack, you may be losing out on SEO in that case. I think the medium for me, and this is maybe before they switched to making it a bit more, giving you a bit more ownership over it, was I always struggled with that. Like, who owns the audience at Medium, and you're kind of at the behest of what Medium's going to do with their subscription plans or their gated content and things like that. So I think that was always a deal breaker for me from the start with them. So, and they probably have evolved that quite a bit since my opinions formed on that. But I think that's what's compelling about email to me, is I can take my audience with me, and Substack doesn't hold your audience either. So I could leave tomorrow with everyone who's joined and go somewhere else if I wanted to.
So true. Yeah, that's the great difference, right? You can take your audience with you at Substack versus Medium. That makes a lot of sense. And I think the piece about, what you said, and this is a question that we get a lot, all right, which is basically, content creators looking to monetize their content. And there are two types of content creators. One that are kind of more SEO focused, and then there's one that are kind of thought leadership content folks. With SEOs, it's probably slightly simpler in a way that, all right, they can do brand partnerships, they can get affiliate links in, they can do all of that as a way to monetize the content. But for thought leadership folks, like the content doesn't get eyeballs like on its own. It requires active outreach or whatever. And then there's just, it's a critical thinking piece, right? And how do you really monetize that? And I think Substack is probably one of the leading ways that you can potentially monetize that if there's an audience that wants to read that. But any thoughts on kind of like the monetization of these two content creators, and have you ever kind of had that debate with yourself?
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea. One of our content people at Buffer, who I've stayed in touch with, he's built this own like hobby site that's turned into a pretty cool place that is SEO driven and affiliate driven and things like that, and it's becoming a meaningful contribution to his life and income. So I think you're right, that's probably a bit more of a proven path in a lot of ways for things. I guess one of the ways that I might think about it is thought leadership content is almost like a lost leader in a way. And so you can build up thought leadership with the goal of building an audience, and then you monetize off of that brand that you've built for yourself. And so you could monetize that through speaking engagements at places. You could monetize it through launching courses. You could monetize it through maybe even more of a like a traditional influencer perspective, where you're branded content and companies reaching out to you given your influence. I think in a lot of ways the thought leadership piece is tricky to use it as the sole mechanism for monetization, because you limit your scope in a way. And so like for me, if I were to I write once a week on my Substack. If I were to only give that once a week post to paying subscribers, and then this is something I thought about. So if I gate all that once a week and do like a once a month roundup for the free folks, then I lose like 3 or 4 touch points each month. I drastically limit the amount of folks that I can support and help, and I think that's a useful consideration to make. I see creators who are great at finding value in doing it that way. Like I think I'm trying to think of a couple that come to mind. So like Dave Gerhardt, who's the CMO at Privy, I think he is now. Like he has a Patreon where a lot of that content is for Patreon subscribers. And so if your audience is maybe more CMO driven, or has that willingness to pay for that type of access and education, I think maybe then it makes sense. I think if, like for me, my audience is all sorts of different people in places and roles and career spots and things. And so I don't want to put that constraint on it. But I think you're right. I think thought leadership and SEO are very different angles to come at it with. And I think with thought leadership, you have to think a little differently about how you might turn that into something long term.
Got it. And like, how do you kind of choose between which pieces are the ones for the free users and which are the ones that are for the paid users?
Yeah, it's hard. So I think I mean, my answer today is there's nothing for paid users, which is maybe not the ideal experience for them. I think to that end, a lot of it comes back to like, why would someone subscribe? And understandably so, like if there's not a lot of exclusive content, I can't blame you for not subscribing. I think it then becomes maybe more the mission piece, like support the causes I believe in, or support me if you've gained from me over the years, like kind of that more like social motivation piece. I think the way that I'm beginning to think about it is that I can use Substack as almost as like a gateway to assets that live outside of Substack. And so everything I write on Substack will be free, but for those who subscribe, I can give them access to, like I keep all my playbooks in Notion. So I could just say, if you subscribe, I'll add you to these Notion playbooks, and I'll email you when they're updated. And so it becomes more like a transactional email system really for the subscribers. At that point, it's not that you get exclusive thoughts from me once a month or anything like that. I guess the way that I think about it is, if I have 4 hours to spend on a newsletter once a week, I want those hours to scale as well as they can. And if I add more content to write for subscribers, I need to find that time or take that time away or something like that. So having kind of like evergreen resources that others can access is more of the model that I think. So I guess to answer your question, I haven't made that decision of what's free and what's paid in terms of what I write. I think it's all free with what I write, but there's a different offering perhaps on the paid side that I can think about.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, because I mean, sharing your thoughts, of course, you'll be able to kind of build that audience, but then and a little extra for the paid subscribers kind of makes sense. So I guess kind of like a part two of this now is with all of the content that you're kind of sharing, right? Like, let's say, for example, I came across your piece about organizational structures in marketing teams, right? And you had your own perspective and your own thoughts and connecting those dots there. Dave from Privy might have, a different thing about, how organizational structures are there, and somebody else might have their own, right? And that's the thing, right? Like, how do you kind of find your own positioning in this whole thought leadership piece? Because there's probably 1,000 people, or maybe 10,000 or 100,000 people that are writing about, let's say, SaaS marketing, and everyone's got their own perspective to it. So what like the question about, like, why does one kind of follow you? Is it because you're piggybacking on a brand that's become really big and they want to kind of follow the behind the scenes of that, or like, is that your own positioning? So I mean, like, the question is that, like, how do you find your own positioning when kind of creating content and kind of building your personal brand?
Yeah, well, I think you're right. I think a lot of it is attached to the company that you work for. And so I probably have a lot of subscribers who have affinity for Buffer or for Oyster, who know me through that lens and are curious about my thoughts on building teams and marketing orgs there. I think another part of it is, at least this is what I tell myself, I should probably do some customer research to see if anyone actually thinks this way, but I feel like I present myself differently in the world than other marketing leaders do. And so I think there's a personality aspect to it that might resonate more with some folks than others. And so rather than finding positioning from a topic perspective, I can maybe think about positioning from a personality perspective, or from a voice and tone. perspective. So I think that's a useful way for me to think about it. The way that the thing I believe I can do a lot better is having more of that topic perspective. I think I write about all sorts of different things, which is not good advice for anyone listening who's trying to start a Substack. Like be specific, or find your niche there. Like remote marketing, for instance, I think is a great niche, as an example. And so I think for me, what I want to do is to write more about branding, like that being more of the focus for things. But to do that, like, I guess the way that I have found to best stay on that cadence of writing is to share what I'm doing week to week or month to month in the job. And it just so happens that, like, branding is part of what I do day to day, but it's not by any stretch of the imagination the only thing that I do, and not the easiest thing to share either. It takes time to articulate thoughts, especially with branding. And so maybe in the future, if I end up with like a core brand role, it would make more sense to do that, or things. But I think at the moment, my positioning is reflective of where I'm at day to day with things. And so maybe the positioning then becomes learn from someone who is actively in this role day to day, learn transparently what I'm thinking and experiencing day to day, and then learn from someone who speaks and sees the world the way I do, and like from my unique perspective. And so it becomes more of like an inside take on what it's like to be here. I think that might be the ultimate niche, or at least that's the one that lets me write about whatever I want, which is convenient enough for now.
No, but that is the ultimate niche, because I don't think there's anyone else that can nail that.
That's true. I've cornered the market on me. So yeah.
For amazing, like, awesome thoughts there. So, we've come to a stage where, let's say with all of this advice, someone is able to kind of build an audience, has like a catalog of content, and has got a Substack account. I think the critical piece here is that, sure, yes, you can put in a subscription, put all of the amazing content that's behind, a paid wall, and try to get subscribers, but like, it's not that easy, so like, what, if you to kind of reflect on your learnings with Substack over the 2 years that you've been with them, what do you think, what does it take for a blogger to kind of start making decent revenue from Substack? Let's imagine a marketer, let's say, as they're kind of thinking about, transitioning out of their role into more of an entrepreneurial journey, where they want to kind of monetize all of these learnings and everything. What would you tell them? Like, how can they kind of build a Substack business?
Yeah, I think there's a few different tips that come to mind. And a lot of my learnings from Substack, I've had, I'm lucky to have the audience that I have. There's others that have built massive audiences on Substack. And so one of the ways I learn from them is just subscribing to them and observing what they do and how they put that content out. So that's one of the core ways that I learn is by going out and seeing what others are doing. But given that, I think a couple of trends that I see is that your brand can't be exclusive to Substack, especially when you're getting started. So take whatever ideas you're putting there, but cross-pollinate them onto LinkedIn, put them into Twitter threads, republish them to your blog, try to syndicate them to other places. Think beyond Substack at first as you're building that audience. You can drive everything back to your Substack. I think that's kind of the model that I've seen work best. But the content itself, make sure you get it in front of as many eyes as possible, especially if you're taking that thought leadership track. The second thing is to lean into others' audiences. And so what that could be is, newsletter swaps with other marketing newsletters. It could be inviting guest writers into your Substack to share their perspectives. It could be partnering with different companies to tell their stories on the blogs, and so it can kind of get amplified in their circles. And I've seen that work really well in terms of getting that audience to a big size quickly. And then probably the only other thing would be just like have a regular cadence. I think that's really critical as you're early in growing. You'll also hear, so I should caveat that, you'll also hear advice that's don't have a cadence, only write when you have something really meaningful to say, which I get, which is fine. I appreciate that perspective also. I think I've always found comfort in a cadence. So I guess there's two schools of thought. You can do one or the other. A cadence gives you more chances. Maybe yeah, that's the way I'll say it. So if you think of like if you're able to hit 10 home runs out of 10 tries, then only write when you know you have something good to say. If you're not sure you're going to hit a home run every time, then I think the cadence system becomes a lot more valuable. And for us at Buffer, like we never knew when we would post a blog post if it would take off or not. And so, that volume play helped us cover ourselves for that. And similar with newsletter, I think if you're starting off, the more ideas you can put out there, the faster you'll learn what resonates, the better you'll get at that home run rate over time. And the more chances you'll have to make a splash and grow that audience faster.
Got it. And I think so. First of all, like completely agree. A regular cadence does give you more chances, and absolutely. And I kind of align with you on that thought. But it seems like if you kind of look at the 80-20 of your reflection of the last 2 years of Substack, and it really boils down to regular cadence about your content, the quality of content, kind of like a little bit of co-promotion. And as long as you kind of have all of that amazing insights in there, it's just a matter of time when people actually kind of subscribe to that, to your kind of paid option. Is that accurate, or did you have to kind of customize your paid offering to get more people to kind of opt for that?
Yeah, I think I've thought of the paid offering as a product of sorts, and so constantly iterating on it and looking for product market fit to a degree has been a useful exercise. And so for me, since I don't offer a lot on the paid side, a lot of it has come down to how I talk about that paid offering. I guess there's a couple of angles there. It's like, how often do you talk about it? So is it something that is embedded in every newsletter? Is it something you send a special one out to once a month? Is it something you only do a raise for once a year? Like, how do you think about the frequency that you put that message out? And then the second part is the message itself. Like, what is the value proposition that you're going to send to your folks? And so I do think if you build that cadence of creating the content, that you have more opportunities to get that subscription CTA in front of folks. And so like for me, it becomes a constant evolution of what you say, but and when you say it. But I do believe that the subscribers come out of a relationship first and foremost, is where I found the most volume. And then secondly, they would come because of what they get out of it. Maybe that's my fault for not giving them very much to get out of it. They don't really have anything beyond the relationship at the moment. But I think that's kind of the order of sequencing that I think of. Like, build the relationship first, you'll get subscribers from that, and then supplement that with a cool offer when you have something to offer.
That makes a lot of sense. I guess my last question today is just, every week, it just blows me away that there's always something great to share, right? So I guess, like, how do you kind of find ideas to kind of write about every week? Do you kind of have like a internal swipe file of ideas where you just keep, I should probably talk about that someday on Substack, and then it just becomes such a big list that you're never out of ideas for the next issue? Or is there kind of like a secret playbook that we don't know about?
Oh, if there was a secret playbook, I would have to share it. So you would have read it in the Substack by now, I'm sure. I'm afraid I don't have that playbook. Maybe someone else does. I guess for me, it's closer to your first sentiment of, as ideas come up, I'll add them into my drafts and I'll revisit them, ideally a couple of weeks later to see if their ideas were any good or not. So that's one way. I think the other way is that I really do map it to what I'm doing, like week to week. And so, for instance, at the moment, I'm thinking a lot about compensation for the people that I'll be hiring. And so I would imagine this week's newsletter will be about compensation and kind of I'll probably share the data points that I have. I might do a call out to folks to tell me if this is how it maps to their experience. And so I think that's often how the best content comes from me, because it's easy to write because I've already done the research and work during the week. And then it's often a topic that's relevant to success in the role day to day. And so there will be occasional outliers there of like, oh, this is a random thought I had that I think would be cool to write about, or I don't have anything to write about, so I'll do a roundup of past ones. Oh, maybe the playbook is, I haven't used this playbook yet, but if I can get 52 great topics in mind, I can just refresh those topics every year. And so I don't ever have to think of a new idea. It's just always the same 52 themes, just with like updated thinking I can pull from a year ago. And ideally, no one will notice, but maybe they would. I'm not sure. But that's kind of I've had that thought before, is like, I've written a lot. Why don't I just go back and refresh everything I've written and update it? That could eventually just be the whole thing. It's just me doing that all the time. But I don't do that, if that helps for people to hear who might want to subscribe. It's new every time.
But that's a really interesting playbook, though. If ever you kind of come to it, like kind of hiring trends change, marketing changes. We went from growth hacking to like, I don't know, product marketing and account based marketing. Like, things are kind of evolving all the time. So it definitely, I think it makes sense.
We'll do part 2 of this podcast if I put it into place. I can tell you how it goes.
Yeah, we'll check in back a year saying that, what's your perspective on the podcast, a year later?
Yes, we could do it every year. Yeah.
But amazing, Kevan. Like, it was amazing kind of having you on the podcast. Like, just so many awesome nuggets. I love the conversation. For our audience, right? Like, if they want to kind of follow your work, reach out to you, or kind of just hear about you, how can they kind of stay in touch?
Yeah, for sure. So my website is kevanlee.com, and I spell my name with an A, so kevanlee.com. There's links there that go out to my Substack, so you can find me there. I'm at Kevan Lee on Twitter and LinkedIn and Instagram, so feel free to find me there. And then I work for a company called Oyster, and our website is oysterhr.com. So we'd love for you to check us out. We're software that enables great folks to find great jobs no matter where you live. So if that mission resonates with you too, I'd love to get in touch and hear from you.
Amazing. And I think that mission definitely resonates with a lot of the audience. We're all from kind of remote teams, so absolutely on point with what you guys are doing.
Super.
But thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me. This has been fantastic. Really, really enjoyed the conversation.